Good evening. So my name is Susan Gier. I'm Junior Advisor at the IRDIS team, and I would like to warmly welcome all of you. So this webinar series is jointly organized by the School of Arts and Social Sciences, the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, and Professor Hodan, who is the Professor of Emeritus at the School of Management at the University of Buffalo, and as well the founder of the Transitional Justice and Trauma Healing Center at the Puntland University. With this webinar, we would like to shed light on transitional justice and trauma healing in Eastern Africa and the Horn through different perspectives, so given the multiple conflicts in the region. But before diving into our today's topic on youth as a forgotten group in transitional justice and trauma healing, I'd like to give you some information. So the webinar takes about 19 minutes. Including two presentations by Mr. Dominic Kamau and General Bashir Haji. Afterwards, you have the chance to ask questions or comments in the Q&A session. So therefore, you're more than welcome to write your questions and comments into the Q&A session. The webinar will be recorded and it is uploaded afterwards on YouTube. So here you can find also the other two webinars, which focused on a basic introduction and on transitional justice and trauma healing through gender lenses. So now I would like to give the word to Dr. Beatrice Churro, who will be moderating today's session. She's one of the initiators of this webinar and the Dean of the School of Arts and Social Sciences at Tangaza University College. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good evening, everybody. It is wonderful to have you around. Please bear with me. I will not open my camera because I'd like to reserve as much bandwidth to the sound as I can. I'm in a little bit of a challenged space. Nevertheless, I'm delighted to be here. And as Susan says, this is our third webinar. And in the context of the African continent, it's just about time that we would be speaking about how youth are impacted by the topic of our concern, the transitional justice and trauma issues. And to speak with us today are very capable people who are very committed to care for youth, people who are friends of Tangaza. Indeed, they are members of the Tangaza family. And so I'll go right ahead and introduce our first speaker. And as Susan said, he will speak. And then after a while, we will have the second speaker. And thereafter, then we shall have a shared conversation, questions, comments, etc. So please put down your comments along the chat box as we go along. We will try and keep track of them. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you are in the Zoom webinar, use whatever chat box you can use so that we can both get your voices as well as keep the sound under control. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Mr. Dominic Kamau. He's a good friend, as I said before, a member of Tangaza. He holds a master's degree with a specialization in psychology of forgiveness, a master's degree in counseling psychology with a specialization in psychology of forgiveness and psychology of ultimate meaning under positive psychology. He's a lecturer of psychology in Tangaza and also as a lecturer of contemporary ethical issues and Christian sociophilosophy. He is very versed with young people. You may have seen him in other fora where he talks to young people, accompanies young people, and talks about young people from a very highly professional and well-informed position. So we are very grateful that you could join us, Mr. Kamau, today. And he will speak to us then about how youth are impacted or experience trauma in this region, and perhaps what we can do about it. Karibu sana, Mr. Kamau. The floor is yours.
Transitional justice and trauma healing psychological considerations for youth development. So I'm going to be quick with my presentation, and then we can have a question and answer. I think the video is a bit dark, but I hope you can see me sufficiently well. So first of all, do you agree or do you disagree? Tell me in the chat section, just a quick response. Do you think, according to you, most people who experience trauma go on to have post-traumatic stress disorder? According to you, do you think, or do you, according to your experience, do you feel or do you think that most people who experience trauma go on to develop the disorder called PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder? Do you think more people do or less? So if you agree, it means that most people who experience trauma, according to you, go on to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. But if you disagree, what you are saying is you don't think that that is the case. So if you can chat a little bit in the chat section, that would be helpful. Yeah. So what is your experience? What is your experience? At least one or two persons, so that we can move on. Do you believe that people who experience post-traumatic stress, trauma, go on to experience post-traumatic stress disorder according to experience? Just one or two persons sharing. We are quite a number, so be great. Just agree or disagree. Yeah, okay. So Priska says yes, she agrees. Agree. Okay, Mike Shiroya agrees. Yes, they do. Reginald Nalugala says. Yes. Anastasia says, I agree. Wairimo Beatrice says no. Great. It depends on the degree of the trauma and the environment. Maganya says, I agree. Okay, I agree. So Pamela and Soro. Okay, thank you for that. So this is an important question, because according to psychological research, which is very, very useful to understand, is only about 25% of people who face a traumatic event go on to develop PTSD. Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is to realize this, so that we don't go with a victim conversation. Okay, it's not every 75% of people who have a traumatic event do not develop PTSD. Okay, and that is useful to understand. It's very, very useful to understand. As you can see, there is a lot of research on this. All right, so understanding this helps us not to go on with the victim language, not to overly sympathize with people, but also admire people's resilience. That people are generally quite resilient in the face of even very serious and traumatic events. Yes, there is 25%, and we need to take care of them. They are people too, yes, but also we need to realize that people have an inner resilience that allows them to overcome PTSD, 75%, and that's a very good rate. So more power to people, you know. So what is trauma, therefore? So trauma is an adverse experience, okay, which we encounter across the lifespan that can evoke great discomfort, fear, pain, distress, or confusion. And it's an event-person complex. So, and that's why we needed to understand that not everybody who gets trauma goes on to have PTSD, because it's an event-person complex. There is a traumatic event and there is the individual. So it's not automatic that this event brings trauma. It's a relation between the event itself. So a very complex event, but also a person who is maybe generally to a certain extent more vulnerable to trauma. So take, for example, we know very well today that children who experience adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs in psychology, they are very hypersensitive to depression, to anxiety, to a huge variety of mental disorders, all the way to their adulthood and possibly to their lifespan. An ACE, as an example of an ACE, is emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, but other kind of adverse childhood experience is a parent with a mental illness. And mental illness here, we're not talking about what we are, in our language, with the madness. It is high depression, high anxiety. This makes the child to have an ACE, okay? But the good thing is, at least there's a minimum of 3 to 4 adverse childhood experiences that leads to children who are highly, say, hypersensitive. And these children, if you shout at them or even just correct them, they start crying immediately, okay? So that's a good sign that maybe they're, so we are saying that if such kind of a person was to experience a traumatic event, the chances of them developing trauma is very, very high. But a child who grows in a very stable environment, when they grow up, they are more able to be resilient and to face suffering properly. But trauma can affect one's paradigms unconsciously. Okay, so, and that's one of the things that also we need to be careful of. So when you experience a traumatic event, it can change the way you view yourself, the paradigm of oneself, the way you view others. Okay, you can be very, very skeptical of other people. You can be completely you're not able to trust the world. You can see the world as a place that is scary. Okay, and you can be bitter and resentful and homicidal. So, and also God, your experience of God. You can view God as someone who punishes, and there's some instances where people have abandoned their belief in God because of a traumatic event. I suffered this. What did God do about it? I don't believe him in him anymore. Okay, so it does change people's paradigms. Okay, now how do we understand trauma? So Jonathan Goldman says there is this shattered assumptions theory where they say that each of us, we have fundamental assumptions of a sense of safety and security. Imagine where you're sitting right now. You have this fundamental assumption that the roof above you will not collapse. So you are listening to me very comfortably until I said so that the roof will not collapse. Now you're thinking about it, to some extent. But you see, you are having this fundamental assumption that the roof above you is safe. But if it collapses, then that sense of safety and security is destroyed. But you can extend that to a huge variety of instances, including your own life. And so what happens is trauma occurs when these assumptions are tested and our sense of security is shattered. So you're in a relationship, you trust somebody, okay, and then that person betrays you. Okay, you assume that this person is trustworthy and this person values you, but then they break that. And so what happens is our world is shattered. So at the most fundamental level of our inner world, we believe that who we are and how we act determine what happens to us. If we are good people, that means if you are just, and if we engage in appropriately precautionary behaviors, we have self-control, bad things will not happen to us. And this is where people get traumatized, especially when they believe, but I am a good person. I don't take advantage of people. Why did this hell happen to me? Why did this hell happen to us as a community? Okay, we are good people, right? And so the people who have this kind of assumption and they feel maybe suffering should not be part of their life because they live properly, they are just people, they are good people in their view and the view of others, they can be quite traumatized when something traumatic happens. So what happens? What are some of the things that people experience when they heal with what we call trauma resilience? So there are 5 things that when people are experiencing what we call post-traumatic growth, they experience the following, they have the following experiences. They start to see new possibilities. So they start seeing things from another angle, They have increased strength. They build resilience in the face of challenge. So they become stronger. They start to realize that life is not about reducing problems. It's about becoming better at solving problems. More meaningful relationships. So dealing with a challenge can create more empathy in your heart. So an overall desire to love and help others. So people who have suffered, if they heal, can learn to be very empathetic towards other people because they have experienced the suffering. So they can be empathetic. But if they don't heal, they can look down on the suffering of others. You just lost somebody. For me, I've lost my whole family. Okay, but that's why the importance of healing from a traumatic event. So they then have a greater appreciation of the small things, of life. Okay, you realize what has happened during coronavirus. People have started appreciating relationships more. And then spiritual development, and here I'm using the word spiritual in the sense that there could be a religious dimension in it, but at the same time, a person can have a greater sense of meaning and purpose. That's what we mean by, say, spiritual in psychology, a sense of developing a sense of purpose, meaning, connection, So when people heal, some of these things can happen. All of them may not happen, but some of these things can happen. So now, how do a person go through the process of healing? Okay, there is one very helpful model. I'm just going to pick one of them in psychology by Tedeschi and Calhoun. It's called the transformation model. And the transformation model says this, that before trauma, there is your personality, there is your gender, and gender matters because there are differences between men and women when it comes to anxiety and depression. There is your schema, okay? So schema is your collection of beliefs, what we usually call a worldview. So your collection of beliefs about yourself, about others, about the world, about God. There is like your life goals. Once you are setting, there is your age, because age matters. The older you are, the more you're able to handle trauma. The culture, okay? And so there is a culture that you find yourself in. And remember, a culture is like phone today, your phone is not simply a gadget, it's an extension of yourself. And that's why you get irritated when someone takes your phone, because they're getting to your space, it's an extension of yourself. And so culture is also an extension of people's selves, is an extension of people's identity. And when you threaten people's culture, they come after you. They kill each other over culture and beliefs. Why? Because culture and beliefs is an extension of their identity. When you attack their culture, you're not just attacking their culture, you're attacking their identity. And when you tell them that their culture is useless or should be thrown away, then you're destroying them. And that's one of the things that happened in many African countries, where we had our own culture, which was part of our identity, and that was ripped. And we have not healed from it. We have not healed from it. And we never have those conversations. So a seismic event happens, could be the colonialism, or it could be, a death of a loved one, could be sickness, whatever it is. And then what happens is rumination. So rumination is these thoughts of, anger and resentment and frustration and anxiety, and they are automatic. You can't control them, and they're intrusive. You can't prevent them from coming, and they're unwelcome. You don't want them, but there is nothing you can do. And they're encompassing. They're not just they're occupying your relationship. They go to, when you're at work, they are there with you, and so you need to change from this. How do we move from this? So the first thing is social support. Social support is essential. And the social support is the one that listens and understands. So there is psychological, professional support, and there is support of friends and family. It is very, very hard for someone who is having PTSD or even many other mental disorders to heal through them without at least one individual person who supports them. It's very, very difficult. Then self-disclosure. So you're able to talk about it, to mention about it to somebody, and to be understood in that process. And at the same time, self-analysis. How am I feeling right now? What can I do about it? Monitoring my emotions, knowing when I'm feeling sad, so self-analysis, okay? How is this thing affecting me? So there are people who don't like to, they don't like silence, they don't like quiet, because when they are quiet, their own inner demons start coming out, and they don't know what to do with that. So they don't like that self-analysis. So they prefer always music, always interacting with people, because they are scared, literally scared of silence. So when you go through that, then they go now to post-trauma. There is still rumination, but now it is deliberate. It is chosen, it is focused. And then you start finding meaning in suffering. Okay, you start looking back and saying, what have I learned? Maybe this suffering has made me better. You start accepting what happened. You no longer fight it, you no longer deny it. You accept that this happened, and that leads you to becoming more wiser and experiencing overall well-being. Now, trauma cannot be distinguished from forgiveness, and this is where I want to go now as a wind up, because I was not giving my time, I think, is ending. And you can text me, Susan, if I go beyond my time. So trauma, justice, and forgiveness. The reason I wanted to speak about this is because we need to understand forgiveness, especially when you have experienced trauma. So first of all, forgiveness is a choice. It has to be freely chosen. It cannot be forced on people by religion. It cannot be forced by culture, by society. It has to be freely chosen. And one of the weaknesses of many truth and justice commissions is people are pushed by the society to forgive. And this is the experience sometimes, in studies that I've seen in Rwanda and also South Africa, that there is a push by the society to forgive. and that can leave resentment. It has to be a personal decision. And forgiveness does not depend on the offender apologizing, because it's an inner decision. It's an inner decision. And therefore, but also on the other hand, it's a process. It needs time and effort. It starts with a decision, yes, but then it needs time and effort. And so it thus calls for patience with oneself, and to understand that just because I have forgiven, anger does not leave immediately. Okay, so sometimes I see people doing this. So if you forgave me, why are you still angry at me? Because just because I made that choice of forgiving you does not mean the anger has left immediately. It's a process, and it's going to take time. So one might need to do it again for a different heart, and this process has no deadline. I want to forgive this person. I want these emotions to leave me immediately. No, that's not going to happen. There's no magic to that. When young people, they sometimes contact me and they tell me, maybe because of grief or something, what can I do to stop feeling this immediately? Why can't I press a button and no longer feel like this? It doesn't happen. So therefore, we need to understand what forgiveness is not, so that when we are encouraging people to forgive, we know precisely what you're saying. So number one, forgiveness is not condoning or excusing. I know, this person did this because, they never meant it. They did not know what they were doing. That is not forgiveness. That is condoning. That is excusing the person who hurt you. Okay. And sometimes when people are saying, forgive that person, they're saying, condone that behavior. Just forgive that person. Number two, justifying. Okay. So if you get fired from work because you did not do your job, you can't say, well, I have forgiven my boss for firing me. No. Yes, that's justifying yourself. Right? No, you are wrong. If you get imprisoned for stealing, I say, well, I forgive the judge who put me in prison. No, you are wrong. Okay, so it's not forgetting. A very, very common statement that people say, which is a horrible statement. Our brain can easily forget positive events. It does not forget negative events. Okay. So forgetting is a very, very unwise statement to tell people, just forgive and forget. You cannot forget. You forgive, but you don't forget the lesson. Paulo Coelho says, forgiving is letting go of the anger. Precisely, even in psychology, forgiving is letting go of the anger. Forgetting, he says, is letting go of the lesson. That's not a very smart move, okay? So forgiveness is not just calming down. Okay, now let me calm myself down. Okay, I'm good now. Okay, that's not forgiveness. Then forgiveness is not fake forgiving. So you're forgiving or pseudo forgiving. You're forgiving in order to look good to people. Hey, Dominic, forgives his enemies. No, that's not what it is. Now, this is where the key, this is where it's very, very important. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. I can forgive, but not reconcile. That does not mean I have not forgiven. So this is so important, because this is one of the things that I find in Truth Reconciliation Commission, that why are you not talking to this person if you're forgiven them? Those are two different things. I have forgiven. I have not yet reached that decision to reconcile. I have forgiven you, but I cannot trust you anymore. So those two things are different. And people don't have to be made to feel guilty because they don't want to reconcile or trust someone who hurt them and made feel that they cannot forgive. And so when many people say, I cannot forgive that person, oftentimes they mean I cannot reconcile with that person. And those two things are different. Those are very different things. A very important one, forgiveness is not exclusive of justice. So you have experienced, someone has offended you, okay? Can you forgive that person and still take them to court? Yes, because forgiveness is about mercy, okay? Forgiveness is about letting go of the anger within me. But I can forgive someone who, let's say, who has been sexually abused, can forgive someone for sexually abusing them and still go to a court of law. Why are you suing this person? Why are you taking them to court if you're forgiving them? Completely different things, okay? And finally, forgiveness is not saying, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm not angry at all. I'm not angry. I'm not angry with you. There is anger within you, but you're denying that anger is not there. Okay, so this is very, very essential. So we need therefore to understand that the individual of the world and the world of the individual. And here I am using a psychologist called Uri Brenner, who says there is an individual or the child, and this child exists in a microsystem with the immediate relationship of the individuals. That's the microsystem. And then there's a mesosystem where it is the religious group or your home or your neighborhood, your community, and how it interacts with, and how your parents are informed by that, and how your teachers are informed by that, and how they're influencing the child. Okay, then there's an exosystem, the place of work, the government, mass media, school. Okay, and then there's a microsystem, the ideology of the world, you know, the customs, the culture of the country, the laws of the country, and whatever is happening at the attitude that are happening at this point in time. And then there is the time, or what we call the chronosystem, the chronosystem. And what we are trying, the reason I'm trying to use this ecological systems theory is sometimes it's very, very difficult to change, you know, to change the person without doing something about all these systems, because these systems are continuously, you know, they are on the person, they are on the individual. And so there must be an interaction between helping the person, okay, the individual of the world, but also doing something about the world of the individual, okay? So sometimes I see young people being told constantly, you know, believe in yourself, believe in yourself. Yes, that's important, but there is corruption. There is a mass media that is constantly maybe giving them values that are not for a lifetime. So what are we doing about the world of the individual? So that's it. I think justice now comes in. So it's about now creating a whole new world. And this is where I will just summarize with the considerations for the future. Okay. How do we emphasize when we are talking about trauma? One of the questions I have about Black Lives Matter in the US, and maybe you might disagree with me and that's okay, is I feel like sometimes Black Lives Matter emphasizes too much on the victimhood of the Black people. So they always see themselves as victims. And that means when a single case happens, you know, the victim mentality is emphasized. And I don't see how that is helpful long term as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, you can disagree with me on that. So impact and process of change. Okay, we need to understand that so many people, especially in East Africa, you know, in Africa in general, there were the cultural ruptures that happened during colonialism. There's a historical trauma, both colonial and post-colonial, and there are new forms of government. You remember, we had our own form of government in early periods. Now we have new territorial boundaries that we never chose for ourselves. That's what I'm saying, not willingly chosen, a new identity. So remember, all this happened from the 1960s, when 1964, when we became a republic. And now, there were people who were there in 1964 who are still here. And which means, I'm not saying they're old, I'm saying it's a very short time. And in all that time, we were supposed to have adapted to a new government, adapted to new territorial boundaries, adapted to new identities, because culture is part of our identity. How is that going to happen so soon without conversations? So transitional justice cannot be limited to reparations. Therefore, it has to, it's not just a matter of reparation, it's also about healing the individual, the inner healing of the individual. And that is important. Otherwise, it becomes simply revenge. So individual healing is the basis of a proper society as far as I'm concerned. And in psychology, we say these are the 6 areas that we form young people to be better connected, to be confident in themselves, to have better character, to be more caring, to contribute properly to the society, and to be competent. And this is the ability to act effectively in school, social situations, and at work. So this is the goal of effective youth development, or positive youth development. And these are the 4, sometimes I listed as 5, but sometimes contribution is separated from caring. And so this is what we are aiming for. And I hope I've not gone too way beyond time. And I would like to stop here for now and see if there's some question. I don't know, Susan, can I take a few questions or later?
Thank you very much, Dominic. Very enlightening and well appreciated presentation. I recognize that we already have a question or 2, which is very good, but I want to read out the one very specific question that was asked quite early on in the webinar. with gratitude for your presentation, there is a question about what do you mean from Martha Mbuvi? What do you mean by a child growing in a stable environment? What would that look like? So that we might be able to distinguish from people who have been perhaps had childhoods that were traumatizing. So Dominic, you might like to comment on that. In the meantime, I want to ask the audience, what are you taking from the presentation of Dominic, either as a question or as a comment? It would be nice that you chat back to Dominic. I, for example, am very excited to discover that the people are so resilient. And I want to say that that means our young people on this continent have so much resilience, and we can work with that. Perhaps we can even boost that. That for me is very encouraging. I would be interested, Dominic, also as a second question in asking, what are the really traumatizing experiences of young people in this region, given that you work with young people? What has traumatized them and what makes them, enables them to pull through? Is it, does it fit in the theory you just presented, or is there anything special that we can look at our own people about? First of all, the question of Martha Mbuvi, what do we mean by growing in a stable environment? And secondly, what trauma looks like for young people in this region? You can answer that now, and then we will move to the second speaker in a moment. So General Bashir will be ready to get in shortly. Dominic?
Sorry, I had muted myself. There's psychology who called Baja, who says that a family has 5 functions. A family has 5 functions. That is providing basic needs. Okay, so for the stability, that's what we mean by for the child, in relation to the child. So providing food, clothing, and shelter. And then number 2, encouraging learning. Okay, so is the child having sufficient food, clothing, and shelter? Is the child encouraged to learn, not just to pass academically, not to just bring high marks? Is a child, in fact, encouraged to learn? That is very important. And then, is a child experiencing words and support that helps him or her to develop confidence, to develop self-worth? Okay. Is the child complimented? Is the child positively reinforced when they do something that is good? Okay. And number 3 is the child helped to develop friendship? Okay. Is the child helped to develop friendship with peers? Because sometimes when children are moving around the age of 3-4, when children are not able to have peers around the age of 3-4, it seems that the effects of that last a lifetime. They find it very, very difficult to make and keep friends. And then is the family stable? Is the family stable? And that's very, very useful to understand, because if there is one of the adverse childhood experiences is seeing one of the parents being treated harshly by the other parents. Is a childhood experience. And just once, even the question of the Beatrice pose is very, very common. One thing that I have found a lot is sexual abuse. I asked from 3 girls in one school. There were 132. I was giving a talk to 132 girls in the hall, and I told them to write on a single piece of paper if they have been sexually abused, after I explained to them what sexual abuse is, and if they have ever told anybody. And out of the 132, 60 had been sexually abused, and only 4 had told anybody before that workshop I had with them. Okay, and this was a semi-urban school. Okay, so these are very, very common thing that I find. Okay, many of the children, when I go to a high school and I sit down, many of the experience that come is the lack of positive feedback from parents. It is massive. I think many parents simply, when a child does good, they simply tell him, so you can think and do something good. Okay, so they don't, really, when a child does something wrong, the amount of lecture the child receives, as opposed to when they do something positive, the amount of positive feedback they get is completely incomparable. Okay, so that's what I would say as far as I can remember. I don't know if I should.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you. It's very sad to hear the amount of sexual abuse that goes on in our society, and helpful to just know what it is like. I see people saying that you have done a great job. I don't like you getting away with being so general, Anastasio and others. Maybe more specifically, what did you actually get out of this? Follow the good example of Mercy there. Majiko, very precise, the whole conversation about forgiveness coming through, and we really appreciate. There is one more question, and Dominic, I'll ask you to be very brief, because then it's the only one I'll ask you to ask. How can you tell that someone is in trauma or has suffered trauma? Are there telltale signs when we meet, especially young people? Can we tell that they have been traumatized? There may be other questions that will be answered at the end, but this one, can you pick that one in brief, very brief?
Okay. So here we might be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. So there are quite a variety. So let's start with what we call psychosomatic illness. So people who go to the hospital, but there is no particular illness. So maybe very common is they constantly have stomach problems, okay? Diarrhea, but there's no particular issue at the hospital. They complain about cluster headaches. You're having a headache here, at the back of your head. Cluster headaches very, very common. But also they're not very good with social skills. They're really, really bad at social skills, okay? They want to meet with people and to interact with people, but they don't know how to do that, okay? So the other can be very, very withdrawn, very, very withdrawn. They like their space, and they don't know how to interact with people. They have no hobbies at all. And so that's another example. They are very, very poor at maybe self-care, self-care. They're not good at self-care. And they have trouble with compliments, okay? You tell them they have done something nice, they are suspicious. They don't believe it, okay? They don't believe it. Those are very good signs. And just to maybe a random two other additional ones is poor eating manners, okay? Very poor eating manners, and trouble with sleep. Trouble with sleep can be a very good sign of some of these effects. So I'm generally given 7. There are more to look for. So either they want to sleep too much, or they have trouble even staying asleep for a short time. So those are some of the signs that we could look for. So since I'm supposed to end at this point, thank you so much for listening to me. I hope my presentation was helpful, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I hope you can stick around to the end of this presentation so that we hear General Bashir, and then may be able to pick up a few other questions, because other questions are coming in. But I would like to take this opportunity to now introduce our second speaker, who is General Bashir Haji. He is a researcher, a PhD researcher and expert in security and sustainable peace in the Horn of Africa. So very hands-on with the questions that trouble us and concern us in this webinar, and very generous with us in coming to share with us today with a particular focus on youth, but especially that you are always available to us, General Bashir, whenever we call upon you. So karibu sana, and the floor is over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chu, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dominic for that great presentation. I always enjoy psychologists when they present. Having done a course in psychology in Tangaza, actually, and I learned that there are a lot you don't take for granted. So congratulations. Can everybody hear me? Just hello?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you very well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Could I ask Susan to bring? Yeah. Thank you very much, Susan, for bringing this up. I look at I took a different perspective, and as he was presenting, I thought maybe I should have gone first to introduce the topic, and then he could really give us the brief. But all the same, from another perspective, I think it is still valid that we continue as arranged. And first of all, I would like to briefly, from my own perspective, define trauma as a distressing or disturbing experience, i.e. experiencing the death of a child in simple terms. in my own career, I have seen different people suffer different levels. I've seen people who actually even cry just by hearing a gunshot, and they're in uniform. You see, so your very own job can stress you. It does not take much to get stressed, and people should be conscious of that. And particularly the youth are vulnerable, in my opinion. And this is between childhood and adult age, and that's when somebody is forming character. When someone is seeing the world from a bigger perspective, probably when you are leaving the roost, having been taken care of by parents for quite a while, and all of a sudden you find yourself fending for yourself, and it becomes unbelievable. It becomes something you can't handle. So some of these things happen. And transitional justice, according to the United Nations, is the full range of processes and mechanisms associated with the society to come to terms with the legacy of large-scale past abuses in order to ensure accountability, injustice, and achieve reconciliation. And my approach is from a conflict perspective. It's not just from a technical psychological, but from a conflict perspective. Next slide, please. So it is important because it acts as a catalyst of change by enforcing renegotiation of the social contract, and therefore it becomes a cornerstone for societal transformation. And in that way, it inspires a sense of activism and responsibility among the youth. That is transitional justice, what it means for the youth. And the longer term aim is to catalyze processes of social and political change, to challenge impunity, address legacies. Dominic said a lot about abuses, all forms of abuses. Acknowledgement, your very dignity, regaining your dignity and your respect for rights. So transitional justice is finding a solution to the trauma that an individual has suffered or a community has suffered, and to a larger extent, a country has suffered. Like, say, the post-election violence we experienced in 2008, for example, the Rwandan genocide, for example, what we are seeing now in Ethiopia, in Tigray, for example, South Sudan, which has undergone a prolonged conflict. You can see what's happening in Congo. And so these things are very prevalent in Africa. If you come to East Africa, Somalia is another case, Eritrea, another case. So it could be from the individual level to the state level. So it varies. And it could be individual or collective. That's the point I'm trying to make. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So the mechanism of transitional justice consists of both the judicial process and the non-judicial mechanisms. Could you go back, please, one slide? Hello? Yeah, as I was saying, it consists of both judicial and non-judicial mechanisms. And these include the court system, which is the prosecution, payment of reparations. For example, Africans are demanding to be paid by the West for slavery. That's the kind of reparation we're talking about. Truth seeking. We've had Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Kenya. We omitted the justice part. Okay. In South Africa, they had the TJRC. In Yugoslavia, we had ICTY. In Rwanda, we had ICTR. Okay. There are tribunals for investigating cases in Rwanda, in Yugoslavia. Of course, in 2008, we had people going to the ICC. That's another way of also seeking the truth, and it's part of the court system that falls under the prosecution system. Or it could even be a combination of all these mechanisms. Okay, and it will also include other initiatives like traditional systems where you sit down and talk and agree in a traditional manner. And the idea here is to reduce inequality and marginalization so that the victim is given an opportunity to express themselves, and the collective citizenry act and coordinate their efforts, and therefore try to redress their economic, their social and cultural status, and in that way try to restructure the broken structural system and bring back, or rather eliminate the inequalities brought about by lack of justice, by the abuse. Okay, and you have 4 traditional elements of transitional justice. First of all is the truth. Second is justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. And I have gone through that, so I will not belabor that. But this is what is the basis for truth, justice, and reconciliation commissions. And this is an international practice. But traditionally, as I will show you later, the Rwandese have their own system. Next slide, please. So according to Triponel and Parson, traditional justice systems are increasingly seen as an integral mechanism through which to implement transitional justice. And transitional here means moving from victimization, from suffering, to near normal, or to normality, back to normality. So it's a process, and there are stages you have got to go through. And this is very important. And traditional mechanisms are proven over time. They have been with us for millennia. Okay, they could be also be based on religions, for example, and it could be backed by law. And like the Gashasha system is a traditional system, but it was recognized by the state, and the state chose that as a better route, except for the main perpetrators who were sent to the ICTR. So in that way, they combined, depending on the level of involvement in the genocide that took place. And they're often referred to by our terms, such as customary solutions, informal solutions, community-based, grassroots. Some even call it the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I mentioned, these are some of the examples that we have seen in Africa: Rwanda, the Gashasha, Mozambique, the Magamba spirits. In northern Uganda, they applied the Acholi traditions. The Somali system is the Her. X in Somali is pronounced as Her system. Her is customary, it's traditional. Her can also be constitutional. In Ethiopia, they have the Gada system among the Oromo-speaking peoples. And these ones have varied strengths and weaknesses, as I say. Depending on the situation, the community might want to apply this, as we have seen. Alternatively, as we've seen of late, even in Garissa, Wajir, Mandera, women have come out and have been vocal, speaking out against traditional mechanisms when it comes to sexual abuses. And they say that the sexual abuse is not properly addressed under the Her system of the Somali community. And therefore they prefer to go to court to prosecute the abuser. So you have to have a belief in it. You have to trust it. You have to submit to it. And in the first place, you have to be willing to go through that process. If not, then it will not work for you. It will not work for you, definitely. Next slide, please. So in the piece of late, it has been realized in the peace building field that you need to engage meaningfully with the youth. Since the subject here is youth, then you really have to engage with the youth. You have to sit them down, you have to invite them, you have to take them on board so that you have a better, well-pronounced framework that really addresses their concerns. And the UN has gone even further and passed a resolution 2250, which addresses that particular perspective in peace building. And the idea here is to institute conflict prevention and transitional justice to work so that there is an understanding, there is faith in the process, and the conflict and the damage done is contained, and justice is seen to be done. And at the end of the day, reconciliation becomes evident, and people move on and reconstruct their lives. And the UN Secretary General, if I may quote him, noted this and said it marks a shift in the way the world seeks to prevent and end violence by acknowledging the positive and constructive roles that youth play in building sustainable peace and preserving international security. So we should not underestimate the role of youth. I think traditionally we have always appreciated the role of youth, because the youth are the next generation. They are the ones who carry the memory to the following generations. As the older generation exits, the youth move into that position, and behind them is another generation of youth. So it's part of procreation. It's a natural system. Okay. And in the Quran, it is mentioned very clearly that you will follow each other generation after generation. So you have got to be mindful of the following generation. Okay. So in future, and the best way to address this issue is for practitioners to think outside the box, to think of a change in paradigm, and develop more deliberate approaches so that the youth become central components of transitional justice. They should not just be a sideshow or an afterthought, which is why we're here tonight. Specifically, the idea is to bring the youth back into focus, because in most cases they have been left out. Next slide, please. Of course, the youth all over the world, as I mentioned earlier, in centuries past, have played special roles, significant roles, by driving social change, political transformations, and even institutional changes. For example, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. In America, you've had very strong student movements. We've had civil rights movements like Saba in Kenya. In the United States, you have Black Lives Matter, for example. You have I Have a Dream lecture by the Reverend himself. So all these are indicators that youth are a very essential element of transitional justice. Okay, because as the world progresses, there is rising inequality brought about by poverty, and they will likely continue to organize against power hierarchies that perpetuate inequality and injustice. And that is because state programs, for example, or organizational programs do not adequately address the needs of the youth. And this is despite the important role that they play in bringing about social change. Okay, it's only of late that we are hearing that women should be given a seat, youth should be given a seat, and that is why now, even in our own parliament, in our own legislatures, we have space for all those members of society. Okay, so youth are a very important part of the process of transitional justice. And without addressing the youth, then you're not going to go anywhere. Okay, because they're marginalized in most cases. You find them missing from the table. And unfortunately, that is the reality. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, in South Africa, the young people were not even involved when the negotiations began. The elders just took over from there and proceeded and concluded everything. In Tunisia, you've seen what happened to the Arab world, but eventually the youth were seen as objects and not subjects. Okay, so they were totally excluded, and this is why up to today you have people coming out to the streets, onto the streets in Egypt, in Tunisia. This is why up to today you are not getting peace in Libya. Okay, and even in our region, you will find that the youth in different ways do try to express themselves, but somehow it is suppressed. So the transitional process is not opening significant channels for youth to engage and bring about the social change that they are so well suited to advance. Next, please. What lessons have we learned from the ICTJ? This is the Truth and Justice Commission in Canada, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Colombia, Uganda, Tunisia. One, respect is fundamental. The youth, the role of the youth and their position in society must be respected. Okay, and when you're dealing with the youth, you should pick the right partners. If you get the wrong partner, then the wrong narrative is passed and the situation only gets worse. And you must have a dialogue, not a monologue, two-way partnerships with the youth. And you must create spaces for them to lead the process. It should not be dominated. And most importantly, it has to be a process. You cannot just jump from a victim to forgiver. In between, there is a long way to go. There are a lot of steps to cover. And those processes must be taken on board slowly and deliberately. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the aim of transitional justice is to address past violations and to bring an end to impunity and violence. But most importantly also to avoid recurrence of the same. But it cannot happen if it is not done properly, and the steps must be followed, and the youth must be brought on board. And we must aspire to catalyze a process that puts youth in the right position for them to impact social, political, and economic issues, and continue advocating for change. That's the most important thing. Thank you very much. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, General Bashir. Very, very informative, very, very challenging from a different perspective. I think today's webinar, we are very fortunate to have two different perspectives that actually approach our dual process, our dual concern, transitional justice and trauma healing from two disciplines, and gives us a fuller picture of how much we must work together. I really want to appreciate how you have brought on board the conversation of bringing the youth, putting the youth at center of our processes, and that the youth are actually suffering from being excluded and that these inequalities actually do prepare the ground, if you like, for experiences of trauma in one way or another. I wonder, one of my own questions would be whether we have any examples of actually successfully, a concrete example of successfully including the youth in a political or socio-political process, and what kind of consequences how sustainable was that inclusion, so that we can see some examples. I know you have told us we do have to think outside the box and to see how to bring the youth on board, and the people don't remain young forever. So perhaps we include them, and then we have to remember to pass on to the next generation, as you have so well told us. So if you have a concrete example, that would really be very good. But I want to also encourage other participants to use the fora that are there for putting in your questions as well as your comments. I do recognize some comments that have come in mainly about the first presentation, but now we were listening so keenly, and now I'd like to ask you, what are you taking home from General Bashir's presentation about youth, about including youth, about the transitional justice processes, and perhaps what we can learn from them? What are you taking home? What are the questions that you have? You can use the Q&A, or you can use also the chat box, depending on what you find most helpful. So as I look out for other questions, General Bashir, would you like to try and give us some example of successful experiences, please?
Thank you, Daktari. I think we can take the best example from Kenya. Our 2010 constitution is a transformative constitution by any yardstick. Even the American constitution does not come anywhere close, and it recognizes the importance of and the relevance of involving youth in our decision-making processes, even at the grassroots level. And this is why I think the systems have been trying to encourage the youth in different ways, mostly through poverty alleviation, through jobs and all that, to try to bring them up. There are difficulties. It has not worked as desired, but at least the Constitution has opened up the space for that conversation. So in that sense, I would say simply by creating that space, it's been a successful process. How that has been implemented is questionable. In other countries, it could be worse. I mean, you have, professionally, me, I'm a soldier, or I was a soldier before I left. And there are very young people. If you take, for example, the civil war in Uganda, there were child soldiers, and probably those are the most traumatized people. If you go to northern Uganda, where the Lord's Resistance Army was very active, most parents were killed, and the youth really suffered. They grew up without parents, and the women even forgot that they had husbands, because they took over the role of the husband and became the father and the mother at the same time, because the men either joined them, the rebels, or they were killed. So it was very traumatic for all of them. So I think there are very few cases. The one I could give the best is the Kenyan one, and I think thanks to the Constitution, at least we can speak out and say something for the youth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very encouraging to know that we have a homegrown example from which we can learn, and perhaps also some things to correct within it. Quite a lot of comments are coming, appreciating the point you've made about youth being at the center, that youth are agents of change. That seems to console many of us. But one question asked by Stephen is, but don't you think, for example, in political cases, that politicians or people in power use means to manipulate evil, and later are the ones who, the young people are the ones who lose their lives, others get traumatized by what they got themselves involved in? How can youth break this cycle so that they do not get taken advantage of in the name of being assisted, so that they can have a better future, a better home, to create a better home for them. How can they break this cycle? So that is one of the questions coming through. Another question, if I can give you two, I hope that's okay. Yes. There's another question is that that in most, okay, so the idea that politicians use the youth is coming through quite a bit, and I would like to look also at the chat, at the quick Q&A, how to empower youth to get involved deliberately for any social change. How do we empower them that they can actually get involved? Any ideas to share?
Thank you very much, Dr. And that's a sad fact. It's a very sad fact of not only Kenyan life, but generally in Africa. And the problem actually is worsened by the use of ethnicity as a tool for self-advancement by politicians. But worse than that, I think the issue of poverty, lack of education, lack of opportunity, all these contribute. Good governance will be one solution. And that's what we should be demanding. I mean, as I mentioned just now, we have a constitution that is very progressive. It has been hailed even by most democracies in quotes in the West as a better constitution than even what they have. But the problem is we are not educated on it. We do not understand it. And especially the youth who are just coming out into the world are not familiar with the maneuver space the Constitution avails to them. So the first point I would like to make is for the youth to educate themselves on what is their right. What is their right? I've seen firsthand youth being bribed at election time with very minimal amounts of money, and that is because they are really desperate for that money. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't care who goes to represent them. An election will be a good starting point for them to make their positions very clear, because that's where the laws that govern your life, and these are the people whom you elect to go and make laws to govern your life in this country or in any other country for that matter. So if you elect the wrong people to those positions, then you'll pay the price. You'll be the sufferer. So what I'm trying to say is we should know what is the point. And I think one big problem we have, Daktari, is that at independence, our leaders moved into the spaces left by the colonialists, okay, without really understanding what their roles were. You have a Mr. MP, you have a minister, you have so and so, but do they really understand their roles? So that education I'm talking about is for everybody at every level. Even if there are things that you cannot be taught in school, you have to teach yourself. For example, you have to be conversant with what is right or wrong. If a policeman stops you on the street, then what is your right? If a politician wants you to go and riot, you have to question it. What is in it for you? When you're electing somebody, then it must be issue-based, not for ethnical reasons or because you are bribed with a small amount of money, or for some reasons that really do not qualify to bring somebody to the legislature for that matter. So I think I will start there. And I think I would like to advise the youth also to be very self-confident. To be self-confident, to be self-reliant, go out there, lose sight of the show, explore, and you'll prosper. And you'll get out of the clutches of those politicians. Thank you.
Thank you. You really are challenging young people to be courageous. I'm sure Dominic, coming from psychology, might also tell them to do very good self-care. And I guess the two can go together, as often happens when you have to work on the edge. I'll read two more questions for you, and I also want to note that there are other questions for Dominic. So we'll see how far we can get. I would like to encourage people to, if they would like to write a question. I do see there's a hand up, and if we get a chance, we will hear you out. Otherwise, kindly write down what you'd like us to read out. There is a question from Mike Shiroya about the role of technology. That what is the role of technology in facilitating youth agency and participation in national political, socio-political decision making? So the role of technology, that is for you, General Bashir. And another question is, who is the voice of these young people who leave their country, perhaps go out and lose sight of the shore, as you just said, and then they get, looking for jobs and they get killed and or maltreated in various other ways. Who should be speaking for these people? So those two questions, General Bashir.
Thank you, Malim. As for technology, I think it affords us unlimited opportunities. Unfortunately, it is not available to everybody because of lack of certain facilities. For example, what is available to a young man or woman in Nairobi may not be available in the very deep rural area. So there is disparity there. And also, sadly, a majority of our youth are in the rural areas. So what we should try, first of all, to do is to decentralize things from Nairobi, for example. And I'm using Nairobi as an example for any other country, from the capital city, everything. You see, when we were colonized, the Europeans and the colonizers designed the structure of the country to suit their lifestyle, their needs. That's why you will see a railway line running only from Mombasa to Uganda. Okay, and it doesn't go east or west. Okay, you'll see a road running from Mombasa to Nairobi, and if you want to go to Nakuru, you have to come to Nairobi. All right, you cannot take any other route because their center was Nairobi, and they were interested in having everything in Nairobi, and we have not opened up. And with all now the technology allows us to overcome that kind of hurdle. Okay, you, for example, if you want to do e-business, you do it at the comfort of your home. You have a laptop or your phone. Now, these days, even the phone is as good as a computer, and you can engage that, create wealth out of that. Okay, it opens up the world. You are more aware. You are more exposed. You can advertise yourself. You can sell your wares. So technology is everything, really. Even in medical science, technology has really moved quite some distance. So we should not underestimate the value of technology. Today's life is dependent on technology. So for me, I would say that nothing in future, in the very near future, many things will become difficult without technology. If you could repeat for me the second question, Dr. please.
Yes, the second question is about who should be the voice of those young people that are getting maltreated in foreign lands.
Thank you very much. To be maltreated in foreign lands is a different issue. My worry will be, why do our youth leave? Why should they leave? Okay, they leave because there is no opportunity here, or so they feel. Okay, but what surprises me is, of course, to answer the question, first of all, it is the state that is responsible. And this is what I'm trying to say. We do not seem to understand the opportunity our constitution offers us. We do not take the state, we do not challenge the state enough. Okay, not in a rebellious manner, but in your rightful sense, pursuing your own right, in a just manner. The Constitution offers you a lot of space, and you can question your leadership. Okay, for example, we have young doctors coming out, we have young engineers coming out, young artists. There is just no space for them in the country. Who is supposed to create that space? It's the policymakers. So we should hold the policymakers to account. And that's why you have somebody in parliament who is supposed to check on the role of the policymaker and how well he's playing that policymaker, how well he's playing the role of a policymaker. Okay, so it all starts with the individual. It actually comes back to the youth again. If you have had an opportunity to vote and you voted the wrong person in, sorry for you.
Thank you so very much. It's great to hear us being called upon to look at what is within our sphere of influence, so that we do not have to keep complaining about what is outside of that sphere. If we were acting as proactively as we could within that sphere, we need not be having so much experience of being victim. So I'm very grateful for that. And I want to bring back Dominic with a question that had been asked quite a good bit earlier. Dominic, I see that you have noted all these questions about forgiveness, which is interesting. And I would be interested that after you answer this question about trauma, that you make a general comment on forgiveness, given the kind of questions that you have been asked and that you have answered kind of privately, or rather on the chat box. But the question that was asked by Stephen earlier on is that, are there categories of trauma? And if there are, what are they and how to help? If you could answer that question and then quickly say something about the kinds of quite amazed questions we have here about forgiveness from your wonderful.
I have tried to respond to the questions privately to save on time, and I hope the people have answered have found the responses helpful. But what I would say to the question about types of traumas is the first kind of trauma is what we refer to as acute trauma. Okay, so it's a single event, like what Dr. Bashir has just mentioned in his very helpful presentation, that a single event that someone experiences, and one of the characteristics of an acute trauma is the people who have gone through it tend to avoid dealing with it. So if it's a military person, just because Bashir is here, they will they'll bury their weapons or hide them away where they don't want to see them. They'll avoid people, they'll avoid talking about that particular situation. Is acute trauma. Now, when an acute trauma, even like sexual abuse, happens repeatedly and for a prolonged time, that now becomes chronic trauma, okay, becomes chronic trauma. And that's another different kind of trauma. Now, when a person experiences different kinds of trauma, so let's say someone was violently assaulted and they were sexually abused, okay? Now that is what you call complex trauma, okay? And each, as you can tell, is more difficult to deal with as it gets bigger and deeper. And then we have what you call secondary trauma. So secondary trauma is when, like a counselor, I listen to a victim who has gone through maybe a serious event, a serious experience of hurt. Take, for example, they've been violently assaulted, maybe a death of a loved one, or any other kind of acute trauma. And then it starts to affect me, okay? Because that's secondary trauma. Or you have seen your parent, your mother, or someone you cared about go through a traumatic event and it affects you. It's called vicarious or secondary trauma. And then we have the simple trauma, or trauma with the letter T. And this I think can also be very dangerous because we ignore it. Traffic, daily traffic. Every single day that you're going to work, you're experiencing this traffic. You don't realize how much it irritates you and how much it is affecting your body overall. But then it accumulates. It doesn't go away. That irritation every single day accumulates and start to having a ripple effect. You're not doing very well at work and you are having trouble. And this goes, when you are going home, you are tired, you are angry, you fight with your children or with your spouse, you don't sleep well, so you don't even eat well, then you go back to work and you're not performing well and there is traffic to work. And maybe if you just solve the traffic, possibly perform well at work and even have a better life at home. So those are the different categories. Now, depending on the trauma, the best person is a professional therapist. It needs to be a referral to a professional therapist. But if usually people have to make that choice, however much we love people, they have to make the choice to go for therapy. They must do that, right? So I I tend to advise people, think of someone drowning in a pool of water. And maybe that person is your child, but you don't know how to swim. Be very careful before jumping into the water, because what will most likely happen is both of you will die. And that is not a good thing. So sometimes when we love people who are going through an experience, you have a brother who is alcoholic and that is bothering you. There's a very good chance that being bothered and worried, you might end up being destroyed together with that. So be very careful. So unless people realize they're in a problem, it's very, very difficult to help them. But other things that you can do is self-care, sleep enough, eat well, and sleep enough means 7 to 9 hours, very, very important. Eat well, that is very, very essential. Self-care, go for a run. Exercises, it releases positive hormones or helpful hormones in your bloodstream, which makes you feel better, So there are variety, and I'm trying to answer very quickly because of time, but this is some of the things that I could suggest to someone who is going through a tough experience. And if you see someone is really, really into it, do not be afraid to ask the question, have you considered suicide? And people are like, how can I ask a person like that? Am I not suggesting or giving ideas? No, you're helping, okay? It helps because you will know, be able to seek help, and even maybe remove the things that they could use to commit suicide. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic. I do appreciate very much that you actually couldn't even enter this other area because there's so much. My friends, as you note, we have had a great session and a lot of things to think about, as well as perhaps to have other sessions to further this conversation. So just to thank very much our speakers, I'd like to invite Father Innocent to give a vote of thanks. And I believe after that, you could hand back to Susan, who may have some announcements. So Father Innocent is the director of the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies. And this institute is one of the leaders of this process, one of the owners of this process of webinars on transitional justice and trauma healing. So Father Innocent, karibu.
So thank you very much for this wonderful webinar. Mine is just to give thanks to all those who have participated into this webinar. I would like first to start with our two speakers who have really delved into the topic of today in a professional manner. Thank you, Mr. Kamau, for your presentation, which invited us to have a very positive attitude, not to look at people with trauma from a victim perspective, because only 25% of the people go into developing post-traumatic disorder, and 75 people really are resilient. They are really resilient, and you have invited us really to look at that. Thank you very much also to highlight the role of culture as part of the identity of the person, and the distinction that you made between what is forgiveness and what is not forgiveness. I think many people really appreciated that, to know what forgiveness is not. And you did it from a very professional perspective, from your field of counseling, psychology, and your engagement with the youth. What I might maybe just add for a further reflection maybe is just to see the role of religion in resilience. We are an institute of interreligious dialogue and Islamic studies, and religion plays a very big role into the field of resilience. So that is something maybe that could be considered maybe in the future, to see the role of religion. It could be another maybe webinar on the role of religion in resilience. Thank you very much, General Bashir. I will summarize your passionate for the youth, and we want us to bring the youth at the center of the discussion, as they transit from from the state of victim to something, you know, better, to put them at the center of our discussion, and not only as object, but as the subject of the transitional justice, with a very positive attitude about our own constitution. And that will bring me to the role of civic education. Yeah, as much as we say that, you know, the youth should do this, but what is our role in civic education so that the youth may come to know what is their right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the team of the organizers who meet every Monday. Dr. Idel, Dr. Nalugala, Susan, and Abdallah, and also Professor Hodan, who meet every Monday to make an evaluation and to propose the next step. As you have heard, this is a joint collaboration between the School of Arts and Social Sciences, the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, with the help of the professionalism of Professor Hodan. We have planned six webinars up to December. So would like really to have you with us, all those who are listening to us on the Zoom together, also on YouTube and Facebook. It's a way of creating awareness and see what we can do together as we try to transform our society, especially East Africa and the Horn of Africa. So thank you very much. And I hope to meet all of you once again in the next webinar, which will be given to you shortly in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much. And thank you also, Susan, from where you are in Germany. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Please fill in the questionnaire there. That is a 3-minute survey that will really help us to improve our sessions. Thank you.